Love electricity, shockwave, central power on the motherboard, yes. Push up, overload, legendary, heavy glow, sunshine, thunder roll, keep this on. Yes, the lantern burn, firm and easy, and broadcast so raw and easy. Thunder roll, sunshine, work it out.
You know the drill. Let's get on with this. There is nothing to disclaim, at least for now. As of the writing of this video, the channel still hasn't posted any new videos. The profile picture and channel banner are the same, and so is the description. However, there is something worth talking about. Some updates to the channel that I forgot to mention, or missed altogether. Around the time the channel had 5.89k subscribers, the channel banner was a screenshot of the bird room from Middle Dave. The description, alongside what was already explained in the first video, also said, "I'm currently investigating what's inside the game." There was also an update written below that said, "Alright, just don't trust what's outside this channel. I don't use anything other than YouTube lol." This was probably written to dissuade any gamejackers from interfering with the story. Around the time the channel hit 10.5k subscribers, the profile picture changed to a picture of Pickle Chin and Song in the dungeon. On April 12th of 2020, the description was updated saying, "I forgot to." What the owner or owners forgot to make clear is probably a mystery. Another update was written on May 17th, 2020, and it reads, "I don't know what just happened in here. Anyways, our captured footage got corrupted again. Me and Ed are trying our best to recover them. Don't expect this much activity." I promised myself I would stop with unformulated theorizing, because if you got no leads and the only thing you can do is guess, you're not going to get anywhere when investigating. However, for this occasion I have some proof. In the last video before the credits rolled, I pointed out that in the description someone referred to themselves in the first person, with the pronoun you and later to the group as we. This is probably the friend Ed had contacted in Sheriff Domestic 6, so that they could help him investigating this game. Sheriff Domestic 14 was uploaded on July 31st, 2020. The description reads, "It's the game that's from the dumpster. Usually this channel is here to show what's inside this game. Do you like discs?" The video is 8 minutes and 36 seconds long. The video begins with Pickle Chin and Song in Dickhead's cheater room. The player moves around the room trying to find something odd about it. Some of you that are the observant type might have noticed that I've been referring to the player by just calling them the player, while using gender-neutral pronouns. This is because, according to the video descriptions, the game has changed hands constantly. Therefore, I can't tell if the one playing this game is Ed and his friend or a member of the group, unless the description makes it clear. There isn't much to talk about in this room. Eventually the player tries to leave, but is stopped by an invisible wall. Then the room begins shaking. The game loads the player in a cell, except instead of controlling Pickle Chin, the player is now controlling Song. Song plays like an entirely different character. She can move around like any other character, but she can also fly and go through smaller gaps that Pickle Chin might not be able to fit through. The player checks up on Pickle Chin. Picklechin is still alive, but he seems to be unconscious. I mean, it's a long fall after all. We begin to feel bad for him. The player gets out of the cage and goes to the door on the left.
I shouldn't leave Picklechin behind.
The player moves to the right and finds a switch and a vent. The player goes for the switch first.
I hope this opens the bars up. It didn't work.
The player decides to enter the gate and finds themselves in a ventilation system. The player finds another vent, and when they interact with it, a picture of a white splotch appears at the top left of the screen. The player finds two open vents, one to the front and another to the right. The player takes the vent to the right and a loading screen appears. This loading screen shows a picture of Song in the darkness, and if we brighten it up, we can see another figure in the distance, which looks like Picklechin. The pro tip reads, "You're really curious, aren't you?" The player spawns in the dungeon from episodes 10 and 11. The player interacts with the door, but Song once again states that she can't leave Picklechin behind. Before we leave this place, I wanted to talk about this carving on the wall. This figure looks a lot like Song, as it is circular and has a hole in the middle. However, its eyes are just below the mouth and it has no arms, legs, or wings. The same loading screen comes up again, but the pro tip is different. The pro tip reads, "A good soldier never leaves a man behind." The player takes the vent to the front and the screen flickers for a brief moment. The loading screen is the same again and the pro tip reads, "A good sense of direction." The player spawns in a corridor and a checkered line, followed by a row of spikes. When the player crosses the line, a timer starts up and the music changes. The player begins running and flying above the spikes, but despite crossing the finish line in time, the game still counts it as a loss. The footage cuts to the player trying the run again, succeeding in the time trial. A door disappears and the player walks through the doorway. A loading screen appears, which shows a close-up of the doorway. The pro tip reads, "Being fast is required." At one point, the loading screen changes from the doorway to a sprite in the top left corner that reads, "Working title." Again, this is most likely a beta leftover. The player finds themselves in an industrial-looking room with hanging wires, exposed gears seen through grates, and dull colors. The player walks to the left and finds a locked door that reads "Exit." The player decides to instead walk to the right where the door is open. The player finds themselves in a smaller room, and to the left of the entrance we can see a face written on a texture of tiles. We saw this texture before in the cube that was next to the exit door. When the player enters the room, they get attacked. The player enters a battle against a common enemy. This enemy is a floppy disk or diskette, thus making me question if they even knew about the difference between disks and disks. Again, trading blows. When Song deals the final blow, she lands a critical hit with the same expression Dickhead used in Sheriff Domestic 9. The floppy falls on its back and remains crying. Once the player gets done with that battle, Since they didn't want to waste our time with the pointless battles, the video gets ahead to another room. The player sees a gap that they can pass over with Song. When the battle ends, the player falls down the hole and respawns in the place they entered the room. The player moves forward. The player skips a few battles until they manage to get to the other side of the room. Here, the player finds other discs that are just like Song. A yellow one in the center, a cracked pink one in the left, and a white sleeping one in a platform to the right. The player talks with the yellow and pink discs.
Greetings. What do you want? To practice?
A loading screen appears of the same exit sign from Sheriff Domestic 11. The pro tip reads, "I'm out of ideas for pro tips." The player spots back at the cell room. The player goes back to Pickle Chin and sees the yellow disc next to him.
Is it him? I think I remember him.
Yeah, his name is Pickle Chin.
Anyways, he looks like he needs some rest.
A loading screen appears of a fishing net stuck in the sand of a beach. The pro tip reads, "A supportive friend is like a dream." The video ends. Sheriff Domestic 15 was uploaded on the 15th of September of 2020. The description reads, "I've discovered a bunch of discs which appear to be early builds of the game. I haven't really gone through all of them, but here's one I first picked up. What strikes me really odd is that those discs aren't from the dumpster, but from a metal trash can." The video is 3 minutes and 4 seconds long. The video begins with the PlayStation logo cutting away to another early version of the Dave Mention logo. Next, the title screen appears. When the player presses a button, the game makes a loud but brief sound, and the game cuts to a loading screen, which also says working title. The player appears in an early version of Middle Dave. Remember Middle Dave from Sheriff Domestic 10 and how it looked different from the one in the first videos? Well, it turns out that my theory of those textures being of an earlier build of the game were true. But aside from that, this proves that what we're seeing is an earlier build of the game. The player looks around the area and finds that the right path is blocked by a door. The player moves up and down the road until they find the end, which is cut off. The player moves to the left path, which is the only path that doesn't lead to a dead end. The place where the mirror room would be is gone, instead replaced by a room that leads to the north and south. The player takes the path to the south and finds themselves in the triangles room, which, like everything else in this build, is different. Not only does it look like the player, white and with no detailing, but the method of catching it is different. Instead of moving to the other side to confuse it, the player must place a brick in the place where it would move, thus blocking it in place and catching it. Also, I don't know what the meaning of that sound was. The player moves out of the triangle room and heads north. Here they find themselves in the room where the locked door and the cloud and flower were. This room is also the only one with a readable sign. It's clear that this is a slideshow showcasing concept art of Song. What confuses me is why in the earlier stages it looks like the designer had trouble deciding how they wanted the character to look like. After all, we already saw Song in Operation Steel Disc 5, so why they started making Song like this is beyond me. After the player finishes the slideshow, they decide to go back, but instead they fall off the world and the game crashes. While this happens, the sound that the triangle criminal makes when captured plays repeatedly. The video ends. Sheriff Domestic 16 was uploaded on the 14th of October of 2020. The video is 8 minutes and 54 seconds long. The description for this video is quite long. I'll read it in its entirety, but I'll leave one part out for later because it describes something related to the video. The description reads, "Oh yeah, remember the game we found from the dumpster? It's been a while. Yeah, here's some more gameplay. Sadly, I had to record the progress from a demo recording. Ed wanted to play the game alone and forgot to record what he was doing, which means we might not upload stuff in correct order in the future. The reason why Ed took the games away for almost an entire month is unknown. Luckily, he's thinking about recording with us again." The video begins with the player controlling Pickle Chin in the Portals room. The game shows that it is being played in the track mode, which correlates to the missing footage explained in the description. The player looks around the blue portal, which is still inactive, so they decide to enter the green portal. This transition looked much cleaner and less glitchier than the last one. The game shows a loading screen. There is no pro tip, but the image shows some text related to the place where we're going. The text is an advertisement, which reads, "A cheeseburger. For eating? Eat it!" Before the loading screen disappears, the game shows some yellow text below the track mode, which says, "Saving your progress, do not turn off your console." This means that the game has an autosave feature, which explains the lack of any save spots or even a button. The player spawns in a white void, with a burger shop as the only remarkable place. The burger shop has the same advertisement we saw in the loading screen, only this one reads, "New edible cheeseburger." I don't know if by edible it means that it is safe for consumption, or if it's a reference to And above the entrance, we can see a character that looks like Pickle Chin, only that it's gritting its teeth. The sign only says "cool" and "good." The player walks into the store and a bell rings.
Oh hey, isn't that the green disc? This is going to be easy, right?
The player walks forward and talks to the cashier.
Welcome to Hamburger. How can I take your order?
Can we have the broken green disc that's above you?
Sure, coming right. Wait a minute. You can't. That's our mascot.
Please, this is really important.
You know what? Fuck. You're going to have to work with me.
The player finds themselves in a kitchen. The player moves to the right and finds Song spinning in a laundromat. The player releases Song.
Oh, sorry about that, Pikachu.
The player interacts with the door and a text box appears saying, "You can't leave till your shift is over." So, if it's not clear by now, this is what the player must do to obtain the green disc. Like fighting the speaker basement and later escaping the shoplifter's hell, obtaining the colored discs is easier said than done. Even if these activities seem like they were made for the game, I can't shake off the feeling that they might still tie into the real-life story. The player interacts with the sink, and a sound plays. The player moves to the oven, and a minigame plays. The player has to make a hamburger, but no matter what they try, it just seems to reset. After a cutaway, which implies many failed attempts, the player finally has the idea of placing the ingredients that they're given in the reverse order. This ends up working. The player, now with a burger on their head, walks out of the kitchen. The player inspects the counter, which gives them a close-up of the options, which are all burgers. The player finds the octahedron character and gives the burger to them. A text box appears saying, "Thank you, kind sir. Quad can now enjoy the hamburger." This proves that this character is Quadman from Sheriff Domestic 12, as I explained in the previous video. The player walks up and interacts with the locked door. A text box appears saying, "Door is locked." Huh, I wonder if this place even has a bathroom. The player walks through the counter one last time before going back into the kitchen. The player notices something and goes back but just ignores it. I should also mention that Pickle Chin's eyes dilate before going back to check on the menu. Something like this isn't caused by the game, but rather the crap quality capture card used, which again, I thought was intentional. The player walks back into the kitchen and this is where it gets weird. A loading screen appears with no pro tip. The screen shows a picture of pineapple pizza. When the player walks a few steps forward,
Hello? Is my microphone?
What?
I don't know who this character could be. For one, I'd like to think that the one calling is Dave, but we've never heard his real voice, only a sound. The most likely possibility is that this is the green turd head lettuce. After all, its voice is heavily compressed and even has a white speaker above it when it speaks. The player walks to the oven again to make a hamburger, but instead they end up making this.
Good job.
I forgot to mention that this video actually has dedicated subtitles, in Comic Sans and all. After wondering what even was the point in all of that, the player goes back out into the dining area and finds an old acquaintance.
Enjoy your hamburger! Thank you, kind sir.
Now that the important part has passed, I can safely talk about the part of the description I left out. That part of the description read, "But it appears inside the demo recordings there's some entity that appeared in the recording and Ed claimed to not see it in-game around 6 minutes 32 seconds. Ed also doesn't remember doing the making hamburger scene for almost a half hour. We sorta had to cut that part out, don't worry, you're not missing much." So according to the description, the original game was played by Ed, but the demo is being recorded by a member of the group. Sometime after playing, Ed ran away from the group. We don't know the reason why, but it probably had to do with something personal to him. Also, I'd like to talk about the entity mentioned, which is the green turd head. The description mentions that Ed didn't see it, but if we look at the footage, he reacted like he had seen something. This was most likely a lie, and Ed deliberately said this so that the group wouldn't question him on the entity. Ed talks with the store employee again.
Oh yeah, your next task is you're going to have to deliver this to
8, 9, 3, 7, 4,
A loading screen appears, showing a load similar to the one in Middle Dave in a snowy area. The pro tip reads, I sort of forgot to add pro tips. When the game finishes loading, Ed appears in a car similar to the one from the name select screen. The car keeps sliding to the right until it crashes into a sign. The level restarts, and Ed manages to not crash this time. The game keeps going like that until the video cuts again. This part of the game seems to be inspired by Desert Bus from Penn & Teller's Smoke and Mirrors. Desert Bus is the game where you must drive a bus all the way from Tucson to Las Vegas. The speed of the bus is always fixed, and the game cannot be paused. Also, the bus steers to the right, so you must regularly countersteer to not run off the road. This minigame covers all the previous points. If Ed finishes this task, they'll be able to obtain the green disc. The game cuts to the title screen, but this time there's something different and, I might even say, scary about it. It's pretty rare to see a game ask you to stop playing it, or even tell you to turn the game console off. Usually they'll tell you to stop to take a break, but sometimes they're bolder on their intentions.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
What are you talking about?
I think it broke. Yeah, I don't think that even just registered at all. Or, okay. So that's not what it said before when I put in that question.
The question is, why would Sheriff Domestic suddenly start acting seriously like this? The answer can be found in the last frame of the video. You need to pause at the right moment to see it, but I can show it to you. If you look down on Pickle Chin's profile, you can see that the 3 discs have already been collected, which means that now Ed could access the door that was locked. Whatever secret holds that door will have to wait, because we have 2 more videos left to investigate. Sheriff Domestic 17 was uploaded on the 31st of October of 2020. The description reads, "This is interesting." The video is 3 minutes and 53 seconds long. The video begins with Dickhead once again in the developer room. The player, which I'll assume to be Ed, walks out of the room. We hear a sound play and find the room to be fixed from the last time we saw it. The textures are fixed and the music isn't glitched, but there is an ambient background noise that can only be heard with headphones. Ed walks into the bathroom and finds it empty, presumably because he already caught Dave. The player leaves the bathroom, but this time the game doesn't crash. Ed moves to the room to the right, where he finds a closet. Here, the ambient sound is gone. Ed interacts with the closet and finds the option to change his character. Many of these options look odd. Some are just 3 colors with a different face, while others are... The player tries choosing one of these shirts, but a screen appears that contains different reasons for why they can be used, like, oh, whoops, content files missing, UK exclusive only, sorry, and too game breaking. Ed walks out of the closet and notices that he came out of the door to the left of the closet. Ed tries entering and exiting the closet one more time to see if his suspicions were right. Ed goes to the left and walks down the stairs. Everything changes. The atmosphere is far more menacing than in the previous room. There are chairs littered everywhere, and there's a monitor showing gameplay of Sheriff Domestic, which looks a lot like a previous loading screen. Ed interacts with the computer. A loading screen appears showing a road with single yellow lines. The dirt around the road is covered in snow, like the loading screen from the previous video. The pro tip reads, "What?" And when the game finishes loading, it's Middle Dave again. It's also familiar, and yet something's off. First, the road following the tunnel is now blocked by a security tape, and there is also a bump in the road. There are also no discs, and when the player passes through the mirror, the sound effect isn't bugged. Not only that, but the song that plays in Middle Dave is different, missing the whistles that occasionally play in the background. All of these oddities lead me to one conclusion. This is a newer version of the game that Ed is playing, specifically the Special Edition. This was only mentioned once in Sheriff Domestic 9, and like the title suggests, it is a newer version of the game that contains more features. However, it also seems to be missing features. I already mentioned the lack of whistles in Middle Dave's theme, but that's not all. Ed walks to the right after passing through the mirror and finds a utility room which contains some stairs and a cage. Ed uses the stairs to climb the platform that contained the vine bird, but when he goes to the room, he finds that the bird has been replaced with a sign. A cursor appears on the top left of the screen, and Ed moves it towards the bird. The recording cuts to the player now trying to catch the normal bird, but this one simply doesn't want to appear. The recording cuts one last time to the triangle room. Nothing happens for some time, until we're forced in a conversation with it. The video ends. Sheriff Domestic 18 was uploaded on the 30th of September of 2021. The description reads, "The game that's from the dumpster as always." Oh god, this has been a long time. I could have sworn I've heard a goddamn hornet's nest near the same dumpster where I originally found this godforsaken fucking game. Oh well, luckily I don't have to go there again. To do, add more info about the one thing you should look out for. The video is 15 minutes and 22 seconds long. The video begins with two text cards that say, "Due to some technical difficulties, some of the footage captured are corrupted. I also tried to replay the game in a new save to recapture the events, but sadly things happened differently than what was experienced. The video begins with Ed in the burger shop and the green disc at floor level. A text card below reads, "You didn't really miss much during the driving scene, since it was basically a waste of time, according to the game itself, and just teleported me back to the restaurant with the green disc." Ed picks up the green disc and the screen cuts to black. Whoa, did you see that? I'm sure that was a minor hiccup. The video cuts to Pickle Chin and Song in the portal room once again. Here we see that Ed has collected 2 discs, but in the end of Sheriff Domestic 16, we saw that the player had already collected the 3 discs. This proves that, as mentioned in the description of Sheriff Domestic 16, these videos are out of order. The player walks into the red portal. Ed lands in a conveyor belt, and as described in the text card below, this didn't happen during the first time playing. Ed tries to not fall off the conveyor belt, but he's not fast enough. Song catches Pickle Chin and they both land in a dark factory. Another text card appears, describing another difference in this playthrough. There used to be a floating platform over there with a sleeping disc, but that's gone for now. Song lifts Pickle Chin to the other side, where they find a room printing discs. There are more details explained, and Ed goes back to the previous room. Ed interacts with a hatch and falls down the disc printer, where a cutscene plays. A loading screen appears, showing a sign in the outskirts reading, "Don't use the elevator." The pro tip reads, "Where are we?" Pickle Chin and Song find themselves in a landfill of discs, similar to the channel banner. Some text below appears saying, "I don't really like this part. Basically, it's almost like a giant open field where you can easily get yourself lost." Ed walks around for a bit until the video cuts. Ed continues to walk around until he finds another entity, a green disc. Another text card appears, reading, "Anything beyond this point is what I've already experienced so far."
¡Ay! ¡Me asustaron! ¡Esperen! ¿Cómo llegaron ustedes aquí? De hecho, hablaremos de eso después, ya que mi vehículo está arreglado y a punto. Síganme.
Ed follows the green disc to its car, and they all get on.
Por aquí.
One thing I wanted to talk about in this part is the mention of a character called the Possessed One. I strongly believe that this character is Dave, but what is most interesting is the surname given, the Possessed One. This would imply that Dave isn't knowingly doing this or is unaware of the harm he's causing to others, but rather he's possessed by the gun, unable to think for himself. Or could it be that maybe Dave isn't the one who's possessed, but rather Dickhead, who, as we've seen, is a stand-in for people from the real world, thus giving another meaning to the word possessed? The UFO crashes and Ed finds himself back at the disc printing factory. The green disc says, and Ed goes back to exploring the factory. Next to a bridge made from wooden planks, We can see a window that shows a conveyor belt. We see more conveyor belts, and Ed moves to another room, which shows a bunch of yellow discs working on something. Picklechin and Song take an elevator.
Picklechin, there's something very scary about this factory. I sorta have many questions such as, are they happy doing the work in here? And so why are those discs being produced? I always heard some, oh, I probably shouldn't say that too loudly.
Hold on, what was that? So, according to Song's statement, the factory seems to cause some kind of corruption. What that is, I don't know. But whatever the case may be, I feel like this will become important later. Also, why did the footage corrupt like that? I don't think it's the game's fault. I think it's probably the same trickery that messed up the recordings a few episodes ago. The elevator stops and we see a hallway with pictures. A picture of the yellow discs working, a picture of a dark room, a picture of discs from the landfill, a picture of Picklechin and Song looking at themselves in the picture, getting a repeating image, and a green screen. Some text below appears, commenting on how that picture wasn't like that before. Ed enters a dark tunnel and finds the red disc on a pedestal. Ed interacts with the disc and the screen changes, showing the red disc front and center. Text below appears reading, "Swap the red disc now." Ed's decision is obvious. Some things of interest to talk about. The disc that gets swapped in the pedestal is written as Game Disc with a C instead of a K, and when the red disc gets swapped, a sound plays. Ed tries exiting through the illuminated tunnel, but Ed goes back the way he came from, passing by the paintings corridor, which is in a state of disarray after the blocks fell.
Oh no, the elevator is jammed!
Lamento no presentarme antes apropiadamente. Mi nombre es Wade.
Ed finds himself in a garden, and I think that this is the strangest part of this video. At no point in the game was there ever mention of a place like this. I mean, we weren't told about the places that the portals led to, and what I personally think is that this is a place outside of everything. You'll see in a moment. Ed opens the door in the middle, and the same door opening animation plays. Ed finds himself in a corridor that leads to a void with green triangles. This void seems to be the same one from the title screen, as we can see green triangles floating around the title. Ed tries inspecting it closer, but is stopped by a wall of hexagons. Ed goes back to the garden and inspects the door to the left. A sign next to the door reads, "Research Room/Resting Room. PS, leave the blush alone." This room is similar to the developer room in its minimalistic furnishing and structure. The room only contains a mattress and a monitor on a desk. There's also some drawings on the walls, showing a variety of different characters and objects from the game. These include Wave, Song and the yellow disc together alongside a happy cloud. The happy cloud again raining on a flower. A cute version of the gun. The floppy disk enemy with some text reading, "Who is this?" Some concept art of the research room. The 3 colored disk pillars and the locked door. There's also some text reading, "Escape plan?" Concept art of a rocket launching into space. Concept art of the layout of the garden. You can tell that it is the garden because there is some text reading, "You are here." Ed tries interacting with the monitor and a message appears. This was alluded to in the concept art because there is another line of text that reads, "You might need to bring your own keyboard." One last thing I would like to mention would be the whale plush. We still don't know what its role is or what it's used for, but I just wanted to bring it up since it is mentioned in the sign not to disturb it. Ed leaves the research room and goes to inspect the other rooms, but finds them locked. Ed goes to the right to inspect the other rooms and finds the same happy cloud from the drawings.
Brody, you are raining on my friend. It's okay. It's not your fault at all.
That is suppose an accident that breaks half of the plan. Meanwhile, I'm gonna be busy.
I'll see you later.
Ed investigates the other rooms, one of which has a sign that is unlabeled and that is also locked. The other room, labeled Tea Room / Tools / Plant Stuff, is not locked, and thus Ed enters it. The room has all the other discs we've seen before. The pink one, the yellow one, the white sleepy one, and a red one, which was said to be in an earlier playthrough of the game. Ed leaves and finds a vent grate at the end of the right corridor. Ed takes it and finds himself back at the dungeon where he first met Song. Ed inspects the 2 doors. The one on the right leads him back to the room with the television. The door to the top leads him to a new room, where he finds a puzzle where he must type a code with the letters provided. After failing some attempts, Ed finds out that the password was Game Disc. Once the puzzle is finished, Ed finds himself back in the room with the 3 pillars, and before we can see Ed do anything, the video ends. Alright, let's recap some of the details that we were able to find. Song isn't the only flying disc. This game's development may have been more troubled than we thought. Just when you think you've seen everything this game has to offer, this game throws even more at your face. We don't even know what version of the game we're playing. There is still more to see. What lies behind the door locked by the 3 colored discs? What does the possessed one plan to do with the power of the 3 discs? Is the game disc's lifespan coming to an end? And most importantly, will Sheriff Domestic 19 come out and provide us with answers or even more questions? We will have to wait and see until the release of the next video.
Pickle-chin? To be honest, I'm actually kind of scared of what's past that door. But right now, I can't, and I don't have to. Because you are with me, and together nobody can stop us. Now let's go and finish this quest once and for all.